Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming today. And we're excited about this topic. It's interesting what we see happening in the social space, where mission has become more and more a central theme of what companies, in addition to the for-profit and oftentimes obviously nonprofit, but even the for-profit companies are becoming focused on not just hitting the bottom line, but providing a good to society and doing something around there. I'm doing work with folks like Peace Tech Lab, who is funded by C5 Capital. We're in a partnership with them from the United States Institute of Peace. And their core focus is to bring tech startups to the market that are focused on helping de-escalate conflict in some way. And you'd be amazed at the variety of companies that exist in that space that they're trying to fund. And you have a venture capital arm, you have a nonprofit that is all about raising societal awareness and de-escalating conflict, and you have a for-profit company in AWS all coming together to make things happen like that. And so those kind of initiatives are the things that we want to kind of talk about today. But before I get started, I'm Todd Gagoric. I run the Solutions Architect organization for worldwide public sector in Amazon, the DoD, Fed Financial, Civilian, and nonprofit space all roll up under me, as well as our GovCloud Solution Architect organization. So those folks work for me, and that's what I do, but I'm pretty involved in this kind of stuff as well, which is kind of the more exciting part of my job, as you can imagine. But I'd like everyone on the panel to introduce themselves, our august panel today, and we'll start with you and go down the line.
Hi folks, I'm Chris Doughton. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for NDI, National Democratic Institute. We're an international nonprofit, nonpartisan development organization that's focused on politics. So we work with public sector organizations like legislatures, civil society groups, NGOs, political parties, anything that helps people have a little bit more voice and control over their government, or helps governments be a little bit more open and transparent and accountable to their people. I run our tech innovation team, and so it's our job to think about how to use tech to do things better, faster, cheaper, at scale across the countries in which we operate. And recently we've been very focused on how we can try and make the internet a force for good rather than evil in the democratic space.
Great.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Merritt. I'm the founder and CEO of Socrata. Socrata is a venture-backed, definitely for-profit business based in Seattle, but one with an important social mission as well. We work with governments at all levels, from federal agencies down to local municipalities, to help them use their data to improve operations, to demonstrate transparency and accountability. We're fortunate to work with about 1,000 different government organizations. We're a little bit unique in that we are 100% focused on public sector organizations. Almost all of them are governments, with the exception of a few that we think have influence over government data policy, like the World Bank, the United Nations, and the European Commission. Basically, the platform that we've created, the cloud-based platform that runs on Amazon, de-silos government data and gets that data into the hands of government workers who can improve their operations and improve their decision support capabilities with data, as well as making that data available to a wide variety of external stakeholders, from on one end of the spectrum, developers who want programmatic access into government data, to on the other end of the spectrum, literally senior citizens who want to understand what's going on in their community.
Great.
Hi, my name is Tim Smith. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Eduphoria. We are a K-12 focused education company. We've actually been around for 13 years, so I don't think we quite qualify as a startup anymore. But we are still fairly small. We're around 50 employees. We primarily focus on student data and student assessment, teacher appraisals and professional development, and curriculum management. What sets us apart from a lot of our competitors is that we actually take the approach of the idea behind these systems, while they are very much compliance and very much high-level systems, what can we do to enable teachers and the end users to actually use those in a way that benefits their students? So the idea behind those systems is not bad. We need to put the data in the end user's hands. So that's what we really much focus on.
Great, super. Well, I have a list of prepared questions that I think we've all talked about a little bit beforehand, but I'm going to throw a zinger in there at some point, so just be prepared, because we have to keep everybody on their feet, right? But let me start with asking you, and you've kind of started to address the question already, so I'll let you go last on this in terms of just expansion. But how do you work with AWS today? What have we brought to the party in partnership with you that you've been able to leverage as part of building on AWS and making your platform do what it does?
Sure. So NDI is itself a heavy consumer of AWS. We've moved, I guess, about 150 servers into our own cloud. We're now thinking that we should turn our server room into a ball pit or something to make it a little bit more useful.
Nerf wars.
But that's totally uninteresting in this context. What we do that I think is a little bit more fun is trying to find ways to abstract away the infrastructure problems for these public sector groups with whom we work around the world. So, if you got into being a human rights lawyer in Zimbabwe as a way to kind of form an NGO and make a difference, you probably didn't really do that as a back-end way to become a Linux systems administrator. And so trying to put appropriate technologies in the hands of people who are really making a difference in their country context. So a few specific examples for us, NDI supports a lot of groups monitoring elections around the world to try and local nonprofit citizen groups doing nonpartisan election monitoring to make sure that votes are free and fair. And so one fun use case is we've got some database software that's used in these elections. We'll spin up a very small AWS instance, a medium, something like that, keep it running for months as they're prepping for the big day, and then the election day hits, and you have thousands or tens of thousands of observers around a country out there working to report on what's going on and sending all their information. So then, when the demand is highest, then we can do the incredible Hulk thing with our servers, scale it up to 2XL or something like that, run it for, $20, I suppose, for the course of the 18 hours necessary, and then shrink it right back down again. So
could you run that a little longer? We need
and so that's been one great use case, and there's about a dozen countries over the last year. Let's see, Kenya, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, Zambia, Morocco, Liberia, and many others. We've been doing that. We've been working with political parties and legislatures and members of parliament in a number of countries, especially in Ukraine, coming out of the Euromaidan revolution and protests. A bunch of civic activists got into the parliament there, and really were concerned about how they could engage with their people in a better way. So helping provide AWS-backed communication technology for collecting information on what their constituents really care about, keeping in touch with them about what's going on. And another example would be working with folks in Belarus, closed society, very difficult place for opposition political groups to get their word out, because the state-controlled media doesn't necessarily put a lot of time into opposition political parties. So helping them create a platform for inter-party debate, helping citizens ask questions and then get answers to the different policies that they would like to put in place. So all of that's been possible for a relatively small NGO with a relatively small but scrappy tech team, thanks to the cloud-based infrastructure we're able to roll out of AWS.
Great. Tim, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been using AWS since I think around 2011. And what actually initially made us do the move is we were running 40 to 50-ish servers that we had leased from a company. And then evaluating AWS, we figured we could probably cut that cost in half. And we actually did whenever we moved. We've actually just now reached the cost that we were paying previously, but we've added probably 400 more customers since then to reach that scale. We use EC2. We have a auto-scaling group. During the day, I think we're actually able to host our 800 some odd customers on about 9 front-end servers. We are huge users of Aurora. We've been using Aurora since, I think, January of last year. There were definitely some growing pains whenever we first rolled it out. We've ran into several bugs, but with the last couple of versions, it's actually, I think we could cut the number of servers we have in half and no one would even notice. It's performing so well. We have around 18 terabytes of data on about 14 million students right now. So that's quite a bit of historical analysis that we can do across those customers.
Okay. And Kevin, any expansion on what you said previously?
Yeah, I guess where I'd start is I founded Socrata in 2007 after having been the director of data center operations at Microsoft. So I had a fairly strong bias for running our own data center operation when I started this company. And in fact, if I remember back then, Amazon only had S3, so I don't know that we would have been able to run entirely on Amazon back then. But we started our journey running our own data centers, and then a few years ago moved over to Amazon. And the experience has been super interesting. So one is, as these two individuals have shared, we've been able to spin up and spin down instances. We can test new deployments. We've been able to shift some of the engineers. We've got about a 60 or 70 person engineering team. So we've been able to shift a number of those engineers from DevOps to more kind of what we think of as core feature work, core customer facing value work, which has been great. But then, probably most meaningfully of late is last week, Socrata announced that we have achieved our FedRAMP moderate certification. And so that process probably would have taken twice as long and would have been significantly more arduous and difficult than it was if it had not been for the work that we did with AWS. So AWS's compliance team was super helpful in that process. As anyone who understands information security knows, a lot of it is just negotiation around how a company or how an organization has implemented security controls. And so there were times when we relied on the fact that Amazon's environment is FedRAMP certified as well. And so those Amazon FedRAMP compliance folks needed to be able to step in and be able to answer how they've done things in the AWS environment. So that was super helpful as well. So it's been great. We're looking at deploying more and more AWS services as we go down the journey, and it's just been a great partnership.
Great. Yeah, that was going to be my zinger question, kind of the one that we hadn't scripted and talked about was, in terms of the services that AWS is continuing to bring to you, available to you to use, how do you see in your future things like serverless computing, Lambda, those kinds of things? We feel like that's pretty transformative in terms of cost, efficiency, scale, abstraction, all those things. Could you talk about that a little bit in terms of what your future plans of any of that or any other services that get you more decoupled from managing core infrastructure, right? Start with you.
Yeah, sure. So for us, it's an interesting concept and a big shift to move from like kind of a web app centric model that was exactly the same thing as I would have run on my my Unix server in my basement back in college or whatever, to move to this sort of service architecture. And so we have a new platform that we're going to be working on over the summer here. There's a lot of potential in the field of games for good. This is something Fuse Tech Labs have been working on,
right,
among other things. But like, how can you get useful information out in the hands of people who need it, and with a big spoonful of sugar rather than necessarily all the broccoli with which educational campaigns usually are served. So we are building out a scalable games engine that is actually derived from work that was done at the big reInvent Summit a couple years ago, where NDI was one of the hackathon beneficiaries, I guess. Some folks built out a game engine for us for people to play. The great thing about something scalable like Lambda, we can translate in different languages, we can set up a dozen different games, we can have it run in 30 different countries, but we don't need to then set up a separate instance for each of these things. So it's a radical shift in development for us, and so for the NGO sector, I think it's a learning curve, but it's got a lot of potential for reducing costs and increasing efficiency in the future.
Okay. Tim.
We've actually already started using Lambda for quite a few tasks that are kind of outside of the norm. It's integrated into our build process for some of our new code. And a lot of automation of moving data from some of our on-site customers and funneling it back into some of our databases as automation tasks. I mean, it's helped us out a lot and drastically reduced the setup time that we've needed to kind of facilitate all that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's an excellent point. We hosted yesterday a forum on human exploitation and child sex trafficking as a side event to this, which was attended by National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, International Center, Thorn.org, a lot of agencies, organizations that are focused in this space. And a recurring theme that kept coming up was what you mentioned of data sharing and the criticality of being able to take data that one entity owns and expose that via API or some other mechanism to other entities that would benefit downstream from that. I think that's a really important point and a very worthy goal of what anyone in this space should be building as part of being able to transfer good to society is all the learning that's available. They used an example of they each have hotlines, right? And they're kind of different purposes for each one. When you call into one, you might not quite be at the right hotline, you went to the other one, but together, when you correlate all the data of what's said on those hotline chats and things, you can begin to derive out with machine learning and AI real patterns of this is a predictive that says this person is truly close to committing suicide or something else. A very, very sobering topic, but one that can be very greatly impacted by this kind of capability of data sharing. So excellent point on that. Where was I on this question? Okay, yeah, you already finished that. Next question is most innovative work that you would put down that you've done so far. What's the most, if you had to pick one thing that is the core of the innovation that you brought to your space, what would it be? Chris, start with you.
So for us, the most exciting thing is our Democracy Toolkit or DemTools initiative, which is trying to bridge this gap for public sector groups around the world. There's a real market failure out there for nonprofit and governmental organizations, especially in the developing world. I mean, it's hard enough here in the US, but in the less affluent and less technologically sophisticated corners of the world, it's a particular challenge. So, commercial software simply isn't available, might not be in the right languages, or it might be too expensive for the groups with whom we work. But at the same time, their citizens are now in a space where they've all got little computers in their pocket, just like we do. When you can get like a pizza or a ride or a date on the internet, it's really frustrating that you can't get like your building permit or renew your pet's license or whatever the local problems might be that they have to solve. So with our DemTools initiative, we've taken existing open source software communities and then adapted those tools to the needs of public sector groups in the developing world. Love open source software, we're big fans, but a lot of it was built by like nerdy white guys in California, and with apparently a perspective that like usability is kind of an optional extra that they'll get to at some point in the future.
Nice.
And so it's a real problem when citizens are kind of used to moving at the speed of the internet. Then these institutions don't have anything to work with. You can give them the open source software, but that's not really useful. So NDI's been working to adapt, translate, simplify, and make it more accessible to these typical partners with whom we work. But we found that that's still not sufficient. It's sort of the free puppy problem. Like you can have a puppy and it doesn't cost anything, and that's lovely, but you still have to feed it and care for it and take it for walks. And if you're monitoring elections in Azerbaijan, you probably aren't the right people to be patching the security updates for your software, and a somewhat adversarial government might come in and take all your data or get you into a bad place. So with the DemTools initiative, we've been able to take open source software, adapt it for the needs of the developing world, and then plop it onto our AWS infrastructure. So we're able to then provide this hosting software as a service style at scale for our traditional partners around the world. So we've got about 300 different groups running different forms, different individual DemTools now. But because of the space that we're in with Amazon, we could scale that 100-fold over the next months and not have any particular issues with it.
Cool. Awesome. Tim.
We've been around for a while. I think one of the biggest innovations that we had early on was using MySQL as an OLAP engine and effectively doing that with data flowing in continually. So one of the biggest features, which was actually unintentional by the design, is as all of the tests are coming in, you can immediately view the test data. So that's something that we've talked about taking away, because it would actually simplify our lives if we could process the data and then not show it to them immediately, but they won't let us do that. So we've actually very effectively allowed data to continually flow into MySQL at the same time that you're actually looking at that data. And we've actually built a very easy-to-use cubing engine that allows principals and teachers and these people who really have no experience, they just know that they want answers about their assessment data. And we've tried to make that as simple as possible and also put in fail-safe so that they can't get wrong answers. Because it could be very easily, if you're using a normal crystal report or something like that, to pull a number and not know exactly where that number came from. So we try to prevent a lot of those types of situations. What we're doing now, and this is actually kind of what we're on the cusp of releasing right now, actually I think we're planning on releasing next week, is our new Strive tool, which actually is combining teacher professional development with the appraisal system. This is something that we've been thinking about for a while, is how do we remove the gotcha from the teacher appraisals? A lot of states, the majority of states that have implemented teacher appraisals with a tie to student data have had their teachers march on the Capitol. I inadvertently was in New Mexico whenever that was happening. So I've seen it firsthand. It's a big problem. We were trying to figure out how do we turn the teacher appraisals into what they should be, which is a professional growth tool. Luckily, at the same time that we were thinking about this, Texas was working on their new teacher evaluation system, and they were very much focusing on a teacher growth model. They actually developed their system so that on a 5-point scale, most teachers should be a 3. No one should be all 5s on everything. To be all 5s on everything, you would need twice as much time in the day. So they built the rubric so that the rubric is the growth tool. If you're a 3 and you want to move to a 4, those are the things you need to do. So we've integrated that with our professional development tool so that we can actually make suggestions to those teachers on this is where your deficits are. If you want to move to the next level, this is what you need to do. So we're trying to kind of take that, something that is a compliance tool, and yes, it's still a compliance tool, yes, you still have to do it, but do it in a way so that it is actually benefiting the teachers.
And Kevin.
Yeah, so this is an AWS event, so I would assume that the audience is fairly technical, but it's also a public sector event, so I assume the audience probably knows a little bit about how government works. So, I've kind of thought about this question, and my natural instinct is to kind of state the obvious, which is that Socrata has innovated by helping de-silo more than 1,000 government organizations and get data out of, on average, more than 1,000 different systems per government. So if you're not familiar, your average mid-sized city runs about 1,000 different line of business systems, and so we've fused all that data together and brought it all into a virtualization layer to make that data accessible and useful. But actually, given the subject of today's panel, what I'd actually rather talk about is what's happening in Santa Rosa, California, a customer of Socrata's, where they are using the Socrata platform to address the root causes of homelessness. So if you're not familiar with Santa Rosa, it's a city of about 175,000 people, about an hour outside of San Francisco. On a per capita basis, it has 5 times as many homeless people as the city of San Francisco does. So it actually has a slightly larger number of homeless population than the city of San Francisco, even though it's only a quarter of its size. And so it's basically taking a data-driven approach to figuring out what the root causes of homelessness are, how they can provide services to the homeless community, and how they can address this problem that not only Santa Rosa faces, but many other cities face as well.
Wow, that's awesome. Another kind of unscripted question, but one I think is probably more relevant to you two. I could be wrong than you, Chris. But in terms of the venture community and the angel community, the investment community, who's looking to fund startups, as I described, for instance, this Peace Tech Lab partnership that we're involved in, entities like that are scalerators, right, trying to accelerate the growth. You two guys, as representing companies that have come from that startup world, what would you say that the message is from a technology perspective that you would be giving to young startups to say, here's the things that you need to think about to secure funding and also have that social focus, what are the kinds of messaging that you would want them to deliver if you were doing this over again today?
Yeah, so the three comments that I would share with any early stage CEO who wanted to raise venture capital, one is encourage them that it's now possible to raise venture capital by focusing solely on the government. This was not true even when I started this company. I raised our first round of capital under a very different business model and a very different go-to-market, not focused on the government. Now, though, there are dedicated funds. You know, if you're an early stage company and you're looking for funding, I would encourage you to call Ron Buganim of the GovTech Fund. Ron runs a very dedicated government-focused venture fund, solely funding companies that are focused on the public sector. And then the third comment that I would make is focus on repeatability. That what is really attractive to venture capitalists is that you have figured out the go-to-market strategy to not only sell your product or service to one government organization, but you've demonstrated that you can repeat that to other government organizations. That's really what venture capitalists are looking for, is repeatability and scalability in the go-to-market motion.
Okay.
I won't be as much help on that. We actually are entirely self-funded and have been from the beginning, so we have no outside investment whatsoever. We've actually been profitable, I think, since our second year. So, but I would very much agree on the repeatability. We do have investors that are hitting us up all the time, and that is something that where we have been so successful is our ability to go into any organization, and we don't really do custom deployments. We just, one after the other, install the tools. And we had some of our competitors, they would spend a year on an installation and we could come in within a month and connect to all their systems. So that's where we've been really, really successful.
Okay. And Chris, I'll give you an opportunity to respond, maybe more in the context of developing world and,
Yeah.
and how they're getting, these small ideas, like the Peace Tech folks who are coming from Nigeria and Sudan and places like that, perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge opportunity. Classic development funding models are on some level just broken when it comes to funding the technology infrastructure that's needed around the world. And so there's a huge opportunity, and I think probably money-making chances for people who are willing to provide some of that seed funding, which can be incredibly small. We've run hackathons where the prizes are $5,000, which is enough to make somebody be able to go half-time on their project for 6 months or something like that. So the opportunities are definitely there, and the will is there. It's terribly inspiring that almost every country in which we operate, there's some tech hub that's started up that's a bunch of scrappy young folks who really love tech, but they are motivated not just by a profit motive, but by a social good commitment. And so there's, I think, a lot of opportunities for groups that are willing to help support and mentor those kind of things. You talk about early stage companies. Well, these are like pre-early stage sorts of opportunities. So I think it requires a different model, but it's one that is not being served well by the international development traditional structures.
One of the customers that we're working with, are a friend and venture capitalist, is a fellow by the name of Jens Molbeck. I don't know if he's in the room or not, but Jens runs a company called Win-Win. He formerly was the co-founder or founder of Coinstar, the machines you go and pour all the money into. And when he tells the story of, and you get money back, right? You put in coins and they don't just give it money. Who's done the Coinstar thing? Okay, a few of you. It's that thing you pour a bunch of coins into and you get cash back, or a little thing you go to the cash register in the grocery store and they give you money, right? Which is awesome, because he tells the story, and I think this is very relevant to this topic, of there's a tripartite kind of approach that we need to think about when we think about venture money and social good and for-profit entities particularly. He tells the story of Coinstar, how what he figured out was, and this is a fascinating statistic, how many of you have like $200 worth of coins in your sock drawer? Pretty much everybody, right? There's got one drawer in the house where all the coins are in there, right? And it actually is a real problem for the U.S. Mint, particularly here. There's something like 50% of coins that are minted every year end up in a drawer. And they're not recirculated, 50%. And it turns out to be something like billions, tens of billions of dollars of coins, right? So the government hates this because it's all this money in circulation. It's not actually in circulation. And so he came up with the idea of, let's make it easy for people to get that money back out of their sock drawer and just put it in a bag and throw it in a thing and they get cash, right? Fantastic. But also, that helps the government because it saved the mint. In the first year they were in business, it saved the mint $8 billion in coin production. Wow. $8 billion. And from then on, he donates, the machine donates 5% of what, because the government pays a little bit of money to get that coin off the market, right? So that's the whole point is that there's a social good to it, that there's donations that come out of everybody pouring the coins into the machine. There is the government who's saving a ton of money, and oh, by the way, Coinstar went on to become a public company and be worth $100 million, right? Or a lot of money, right? And sold it, right? So that three-part approach is very, very much a great way to think about startups, social good, serving the public, but yet for profit. And I'd like you guys to kind of reflect on how do each of your entities look at that structure and approach that idea of there's three ways we can do good, right? For the government or the public space, public sector, the private sector, you know, making someone money and serving a social good as well. Tim, I'll start with you.
So basically, how we can focus on serving the public good through for-profits. And I think that's kind of where a lot of companies are heading now. I think most new startups, they're trying to come up with a, let's not just make money, but let's also focus on fixing some problem. And I think that's honestly what makes you very successful, is being able to focus on a problem. That's what's really going to open the doors and really help you expand at that point.
Okay. Kevin.
Yeah, it's really core to who Socrata is, that it's a very unique circumstance where you can be a very ambitious West Coast venture-backed, product-led company, but also have a really important social mission. We use it in our recruiting, and if you think about it, you're trying to recruit an engineer from Google or from Microsoft, and it really.
Thank you for not recruiting.
Yeah, I bit my tongue when I almost said Amazon, but it really is a draw to engineers who a lot of these engineers are working for software companies by day and working on civic technologies by night, and here they're able to do that as a profession. Hareen, Lisa, and Matt, raise your hand real quick. So three Socrata folks here in the audience, former public servants, former state CIO for the state of Wisconsin. So it's really exciting for us at Socrata because we feel like we have this opportunity to build a for-profit company, but we feel like the work that we're doing is improving societies, improving communities. And like the one example that I like to give people is, if you think back to, say, 5 or 6 years ago and how hard it was to use public transportation in a city that was new to you, whether that was a U.S. city that you just weren't familiar with, or whether that was an international city where maybe you didn't speak the language. And now you can go into virtually any city around the globe, pop up your smartphone, and have the public transportation system really almost tell you where to go. I can go to London, I can go to Barcelona. It's super easy to navigate. And the prerequisite to all of that is some of the work that Socrata had started doing 7 or 8 years ago, basically to get transportation data online from all these different governments. So it's really core to our mission and who we are, and we have really developed a fondness over the last 7 or 8 years for the mission of public sector organizations, and I think it comes through in the passion of our people.
Fantastic. Chris?
It's such a great question, Todd, because it all comes down to incentives. And so how do you get the right sort of incentives to align for groups to be effective? And the international development sector has been wrestling this in a conventional way for as long as it's been in existence. But then you take the tech spin on it, and working with all these effectively startup groups around the world, it's a real challenge. You have like young earnest techies who understand technology, but they don't necessarily understand politics. And you've got like kind of more staid government institutions or political parties or whatever who understand how systems work and the problems and the needs, but they don't get the tech. And you have to find ways to kind of bridge that gap and bring those people together so the techies understand the actual problems and they understand that this is not all stuff that can be abstracted away. You can't, kind of create an algorithm that gets rid of the fact that humans disagree with each other about certain things. How do you find a way to kind of get all that to flow together? So if you can get those sorts of incentives right in some sort of win-win structure, then that's where you have clients and you have demand and you have supply, and everything really can be successful. Or else you'll be on the scrap heap of all of the other well-intentioned, possibly well-funded, but not necessarily well-envisioned development tech projects out there.
Right. It's funny you use the term win-win. That's actually the name of Yen's fund company out of Seattle, Win-Win, which is absolutely the right concept. The question that I'd like to ask now is, what problem that you each have, or have that is sitting there smack in the middle of your everyday, that you haven't solved yet? Describe to me that problem, whether it's a technology problem, a policy problem, a business running, whatever. The problem you haven't solved yet, and how you're thinking about it. Let's start with you again.
Well, the problem we haven't solved yet is democracy.
Okay, it was a big question.
I'll scope it a little bit more here. So, not everybody has broadband. Not everybody has these miraculous little computers in their pocket. Not everybody in the world is even literate. And so how do you find ways to deliver public sector services, government, non-government, NGO services to these people? So one of the things that's most exciting for me that we're looking forward to wrestling with over the summer here is how we can take advantage of the rise of the bots, both in messenger form and particularly with Amazon Lex, where we can tap into the way that everybody's always communicated, just by chatting, with government institutions, and totally leapfrog the whole web GUI paradigm for engaging with government entities. So we hope that we can dramatically drop the friction that's currently inherent in engagement with government or civic organizations. So that's one of the big problems we're going to be wrestling with over the next few months.
Okay. Kevin.
Yeah, so you touched on this a little bit, Todd. If you think about your typical government organization, I mentioned they run about 1,000 different line of business systems. Most governments are made up of multiple departments and agencies, and even just sharing data across departments and agencies is hard for them to do. But if you think about the most challenging problems that societies face, things like the opioid epidemic, the homelessness crisis that I talked about in Santa Rosa, overcrowding of county jails. The solutions to all those problems start with interagency data sharing, and it starts with interagency data sharing in a fairly private way. So there's some information that one agency is willing to share with the other, and the other agency is willing to share a little bit in the opposite direction. But for reasons around privacy and confidentiality, you probably don't want to expose the entire record about the individual. And so some of the work that we're doing is laying the foundation for that. In fact, even what I mentioned earlier about FedRAMP Moderate lays the foundation so that we can now have more internal private data workloads in the platform, so you can start to do this kind of agency to agency, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, even public to private data sharing, so that you can solve some of these big problems that societies face.
We're going to go a little bit smaller. One of the issues that it's kind of been on my mind from the beginning whenever we started working in data analysis and dealing with student data is, how do we collect the information that is not just assessment data? All of the information that the teacher knows, but it's not ever going to go on a bubble sheet. It's never going to just be entered into a web page. Yes, the student may have gotten the answer right, but did the teacher have to prompt the student? So is the student working individually, and just because they got the question right, do you count that as right? Or do you say the student hasn't quite mastered that concept yet? We have all the information we need to be able to align year over year of state data, and state and local data, so that you can take a picture of a student, vertically align all the standards, and say, this student coming into this grade, this is exactly how they're doing. But the piece that we're missing is the data that the teacher has, and how do we collect that? How do we pull that information out of the teacher's mind of, are the students able to work on their own, and actually apply that on top of the data that we've collected? That has huge implications in areas like special education, so that you can more properly craft an ARD to the specific deficits that the kid has, not just based on assessment data, and not just based on pulling a bunch of papers that you've done for the last week, so that you can go into that ARD and come up with something that you're going to focus on. You can base it on real data at that point.
Okay, great. One of the things that's causing alarm, reactions all the way from alarm to this is going to bring about nirvana, of course, is the whole area of artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? And the impact that that's going to have on societies going forward around the world, whether it's your developed nation or sort of an underdeveloped nation or whatever. I'd be interested in your perspective on the, if we take those areas of artificial intelligence, IoT, machine learning, very, very large areas of research and propagation of information. How are they going to impact what you specifically focus on at NDI, at Socrata, and at
Eduphoria.
Yes. Sorry. Good.
Great. Yeah, huge and really challenging question. At the risk of sounding a bit like Empire Strikes Back's beginning scroll, it's a dark time for democracy. And there's sort of, we've seen it here in the US, it's been front and center in all the news, but it's true globally. Fake news, if we have to use that term, and kind of digital propaganda and manipulation is on the rise. And when that gets properly fueled with AI, it's going to be terrifying. Right now, bots are a big problem for manipulating social discourse, the kind of the communications that democracy relies on. You throw in the ability to not have it all look like 6,000 different eggs all tweeted the same thing at the same time, but individually tailored messages hitting you for your interests based on the data sets they've got, stolen, bought, whatever, is a place where it's going to be a very interesting and challenging time, I think, for the institutions of democracy.
Any upside here?
It's funny, isn't it? Like, rewind 10 years, and I would have told you that the internet was like the magic fairy dust of democracy, and people being able to communicate faster, better to each other would help. But, I think that's one of our grand challenges here is how can we help these political institutions that have supported us relatively well for the past 200 years adapt to a radical new world. So, I think there is hope that there's the ability for governments and such to benefit from data sets. What you're talking about here, Kevin, is really exciting and inspiring, and it's a long way from what a mid-sized community in Indonesia is able to do right now. Sure. So how can we help kind of small d democratize that sort of access to technology to help them try and stay afloat and keep up with things? One quote that our NDI's chairman of our board, Madeleine Albright, often uses is that citizens are engaging with their government using 21st century technologies, but governments are replying with 20th century systems and 19th century bureaucracies. So there's a lot of catch up to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kevin.
Yeah, I'll first state as an occupational hazard, as an entrepreneur, I am an eternal optimist. So I am bullish on ML and AI.
Well, it's good you're here to balance out the
That's right. That's right. So again, kind of one of the things that's unique about focusing exclusively on the public sector is that you start to see some kind of patterns in the same kinds of organizations around the country. So mid-sized cities have very similar data sets to each other. The structure of the crime data set in Atlanta may be slightly different than the structure of the crime data set in Dallas, but they're close enough that you can run it through machine learning and start to get some insights about that data. And so I think one of the big opportunities in the public sector that machine learning is going to help accelerate is the opportunity to create benchmarks and KPIs so that we can compare performance from one city to another, one county to another, one state to another. And if you think about the Bill Gates quote from a few years ago, which is the start of improvement is measurement. So starting to measure it, starting to get some benchmarks, starting to see who is performing in what we'll call best in breed around the country. What are they doing differently there? So if one county or one school district around the country has a much higher high school graduation rate, what are they doing there that we can learn from? So I'm pretty encouraged about that. Obviously the whole world of transportation is changing rapidly before our eyes. I think there's going to be enormous opportunity to tap into all the sensors and all the IoT and even the computer vision that's in a lot of these autonomous vehicles. We're fortunate to work with state state of Utah's Department of Transportation, and we're learning about some of the computer vision work that companies like Tesla are doing, where not only can they pick up where the lanes are between the highways so that they can help an autonomous vehicle or even a sleepy driver stay between the lanes, but imagine when a thunderstorm or rainstorm comes in and those lanes are hard to pick up, they can then go back to the network and say, hey, I can't find the lane anymore. Where's the lane? And they can send down the coordinates of the lane and keep that car on the road. Again, I'm optimistic. I'm bullish. I'm very excited about what the future is going to bring in terms of AI and Internet of Things and machine learning, making the world a better place.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have a much more optimistic look at it as well. We have a massive amount of data from curriculum, professional development, and all the assessment data, and trying to combine all of that so that we can glean any information on if teachers are using these lessons, does it have an impact on student performance? Across the 800 customers we have, can we find methods of teaching different concepts or professional development that teachers have been to that actually does impact student performance, and then actually use that to offer those to other teachers who aren't doing as well. So we can impact student performance based on the historical data that we have.
Okay. We have about 4 minutes left, and I would like to just ask if there's anybody that has a question out in the audience for anyone on our panel. You've covered it all, gentlemen.
Oh, the icebreaker.
Yes, yes.
You mentioned Belarus and the challenges of a close government society there. Are you guys threatened at all by having that data?
Yeah, so if we're talking about if I'm continuing with my pessimistic take on things, one of the other problems that we're trying to work on, and this ultimately unsolvable one, is security. And as more organizations are aggregating more information in the cloud, it creates some trade-offs. So for one example of an Eastern European country in which we were operating, people would come with their lists of supporters out of the country on thumb drives or on paper. They'd go to our office and they would upload them into my SQL database, or an Access database, sitting on the country director's computer. Now, the country director was a former Marine, so I feel pretty safe about that information, but for a joke that probably some techies will get, like the latency was a bit difficult to go pull any new data sets there. So now they've got that up in the cloud. So they're safe from the physical raids that were literally taking all their computers or card files for some of the more traditionalist folks. But then you've got a different set of problems. And Amazon's been very helpful for that. You've got great security people. Being able to be behind your infrastructure has been very helpful for that. But it's an ongoing struggle. There's these things then become targets that people go after. But the counterpoint is that if they were doing it on their own, then they'd totally be screwed. Like all of our partners who do their own self-hosting, they never apply the security patches. They don't do anything with that. So it's a challenge.
Yes. Lucy.
So Chris, you talked about sort of in some of the countries where you work, there's a vibrant, tech hub, and lots of pre-early stage, social entrepreneurs, and that the development model as it exists right now doesn't really sort of funnel effectively resources to those people. I just wondered, have you thought about what an effective support system, or whether it comes from the development community or the private sector, what that might look like to help those entrepreneurs that don't have the same sort of access that we have here?
Right. A great question, and one that I think is an unsolved problem as of yet, but there's a few legs to it, or pieces to it. One is something that I think is going to get ramped up with Amazon in a partnership with NDI in the near future, is that providing sandboxes for people to play in, where they can learn these tools, get access to these things, and then get kind of support. So one missing piece that I know that there's a market failure here. There are people who want to help folks in the developing world get their products going, provide skills transfer and stuff like that. There's no marketplace for them to find each other right now. So mentorship is one of the big gaps. The actual spaces to work in, hosting and so on, very useful. And then there's the funding question. But it's not big dollar amounts. small numbers of thousands of dollars can help an organization kick up to a level where they then are professional enough that they can go after other funding streams, which might involve like actual development aid. So project in Cote d'Ivoire, some groups came together, did some great pilot projects, got funded by a number of different organizations, including the UNDP, the US Embassy, and the local election commission themselves.
In the back.
This question is coming from the perspective of K-12 STEM education. That does work.
Say that again.
This question is coming from the perspective of K-12 STEM education.
Okay.
And what I'm wondering is what, if anything, I think, Kevin, this might be more focused on you, but how do we, what you're doing to allow anonymous or at least some type of access that takes into account the PID concerns that would allow middle schoolers, high schoolers to engage with this content, these data sets and start to analyze that, interact with it in a way where, you know, as they come out of high school and become adults, they really understand the impact and have worked with some of this data and in fact maybe solving some real problems along the way.
That is definitely not something that we've done. It would be interesting to propose that to some of our customers. They're very much concerned about FERPA and who has access to all of that information. So even making it anonymous, we might have a little bit of a fight. So that is definitely something that that would be interesting to see.
Well, there we go. We have another business plan, a 6-pager that can be written, and a new business model being stood up. Well, I would like to thank all of our panelists today. Please give them a big hand. Appreciate it. And please fill out your surveys. Say it was the best and most interesting session you've been to the whole time.
There you go.
No, I'm just kidding. Thank you very much, folks. Appreciate it. Have a good day.